Hello guys, and welcome back to my YouTube video. So in this video we are going to be continuing with our food delivery application using Firebase as our backend and Stripe as our payment gateway, and then we are going to be using Riverpod as our state management package. So in this video, in this episode, we are going to work on the favorites feature, right, whereby we will be adding menu items to favorites, right. So basically what we do, we'll be using a database that is called Hive, right, in Flutter. So Hive allows you to store key value pairs, right, in the form of boxes, right. Think of it as we are going to store all the favorite menus that the user adds to the favorite into a box that is going to be called what? The favorite box, right. So for example, let's just add these items to favorites, right. Let's just add these items to favorites, right. And then as you can see, if I go to our favorites, now we now have the favorites, right. So we can also delete these particular items, right. So now, without wasting much of that time, let's start building the application, right. So now let's go into our features folder, right. Inside our features folder, let's create another folder called the favorite, right. Favorite folder, right. So basically create another folder for the model, and then create another folder for the controller, right. Create another folder for the controller, and then we need to create another folder for the repository, right. So our repository is going to be communicating with our database, right. And then we need also to create another folder for our screen, right. Screen. Okay, so right, so I think we had created this folder, the favorite folder right there, right. We already have controller, repository, screen, and then widgets, right. So now let's go inside our repository. Let's create a file called for favorite repository .dat, right. So basically what we are going to do, we are just going to create a class called the favorite repository, right. We need to create this class called the favorite repository, right. And then we need to create a box, right. So as I mentioned earlier, this box is, we are going to store our particular favorite menus inside a box, right. So we are going to create a box, right. And then so now it's saying that there is no method. So what we basically need to do inside our pubspec.yaml file, right. Inside our pubspec.yaml file, you need to import the Hive Flutter and then the Hive package, right. This package right there, you get them inside our repository, right. So a box which is going to be of type dynamic, right. So dynamic, that means it can be of any data type, right. So we are just going to call this box menu item box, right. Menu item box, right. And then what we need to do here is we need to import Flutter Hive, right. So let's import Flutter Hive, right. Now the next thing that we need to do now is we need to create a constructor, right. So the favorite repository, we need to create a constructor, and then we need to point to this short menu box right there, right. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a method for adding our menu to that box, right. It's more like we're adding the menu to the box. So let's just call it add menu item, and then takes in a menu model and then menu, and then it's going to be an async function, right. It's going to be an async function. So let's make sure that we just import this menu model right there, right. And then what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to await, and then menu item box dot add. So this method will allow us to add what? To add our menu to our what? To our favorite box, right. Now we are done with the method for adding our menu to our box, right. Now let's create another method for deleting menu for our box, right, just in case we want to delete items from the favorites, right. So we need that particular items index, right? So it's going to be an integer of type index, right? And then it's going to be an async function, right? It's going to be an async function. And then what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to await the menu item box. And then we are going to delete that item at that particular index, right? We are going to delete that item at that particular index, right? And then now the next method that we are going to create is a method for getting all the favorite items in our box, right? So it's going to be a list of type menu model, since we want to get all the menus that are in our favorite box, right? And then what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to return the menu item box with its values, and then we are simply going to loop through all the values that are in our menu item box, right? And then we are simply going to get each and every item, and then we are going to cast that item into our menu model, right? Menu model dot from JSON, right? And then from JSON, and then we pass in each particular item, right? And then we are simply going to convert this to a list, right? Okay, so now these are our three methods now for creating favorite menu items, right? So now what we simply need to do now is we need to create a favorite repository provider, right? Favorite repository provider, which is going to be of type provider, and then the provider is going to be of type favorite repository, and then it's going to take in reference. So make sure that you import Flutter riverpod, because we are going to use that as our state management package, right? Flutter riverpod. And then here what we are simply going to do is we are going to create a box. So we are going to create a box, right? In this case, our box is going to be a hive.box, right? And then we need to give our box a name that's going to be menu favorites. That's the name of our box, right? And then we just return favorite repository, and then we cast in this box, right, inside our construct, right? So now that we are done with the menu repository, right, now we need to move on to the we need to take care of the menu model, right? We need to take care of the menu model. So if you go inside our menu, we have our menu model right here, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to annotate our menu model class with the Hive type, right? So this is going to just tell it that this menu model is going to be of type Hive, right? And then we paste in this ID. So this ID, type ID, which is going to be 0, right? And then now the first thing that we need to do here is all the fields inside our menu model, right there. All the fields inside our menu model, what we are simply going to do is we are going to annotate them with the Hive field, right? So that's what it's just going to do is it's just going to convert this string type of image into a Hive field, right? And then the index is going to be 0 here. And then for the title, we do the same, right? Hive field is going to be 1. We do the same for the description, which is going to be 2. We do the same also for the price, right? Hive field right there, the index is going to be 3, right? And then we do the same for the quantity, right? Index is going to be 4. And then for the menu ID, right? And then also for the ingredients, right? And then for the category ID, right? And then it's just going to be at Hive field and then the index is going to be 7, like this, right? So this is just going to convert all these our string methods into Hive fields, right? Type, right? And then if we go inside our pubspec.yaml file for Hive, for it to work, right, go into pubspec.yaml file. Inside our pubspec.yaml file, under dependencies, right, make sure you have the build runner command, right, that is used to generate classes, build runner, and then Hive generator that's going to generate Hive classes, and also the JSON serializable, right? So here I'm just going to run a command that's going to generate like a Hive class for us, right? So let's run this dat run build runner, delete conflicting outputs, right? Okay, so now that we are done, right, let's go inside our main.dat file, right? Inside our main.dat file, under the widgets Flutter binding, right? What we need to do here, right here, is that we need to initialize Hive, right? So what we simply do is await hive.init flutter, right? So we're initializing it. And then what we are going to do is await we want a scenario whereby when our application runs, right, we want to open our box. So our box name is the menu favorites, right? So hive.open box, right? And then make sure that the name of the box corresponds with the name that we used inside our menu favorites, right? Inside our favorite repository. So this right here. And then let's go inside here, and then I will just paste it inside. Okay. Okay, menu favorites right here. And then what we also need to do is we need to register and adapt, right? Hive dot register and adapter, right? And then the adapter is going to be menu model adapter, right? So if you don't see this menu model adapter, just know that you did something wrong here inside our menu model, or you didn't include the Hive generator build run and the JSON serializer. Make sure you have them under the dev dependencies, because you need them to generate that adapter, because if you don't, it will not work, right? Right, so now we are done with setting the Hive part, right? So let's go back to our favorite repository, and then let's go inside the controller, right? So inside the controller, what we need to do is we need to create a favorite controller dot dat, right? So let's go under controller, and then under the favorites controller, right? So let's create a class, favorite controller, which is going to extend our async notifier, which is going to be of type list menu model, right? And then let's make sure that here we import Flutter Hive, right? So first let's import the menu model, and then let's import Flutter Hive, right? And then we need to create an override function, right? So let's get rid of this, right? So let's create a future, which is going to be of type list menu model, and then we create the build function right here, which is going to be an async function, right? And then what we need to do is let's create favorite repository here, which we are going to initialize inside our build function right there. So favorite repository, this goes to reference.watch, right? And then favorites repository provider, right? And then what we are simply going to do is we are going to return right, we are simply going to return the get menu items right there, right? So now let's go inside our, let's create a function for a feature function, right, for adding our items to our menu, right? For it, so it's going to take in our a menu model of type menu, and then we need a build context, right, so that we can display a snack bar, right? Build context. Yeah, let's make sure that this is an async function, right? So at the beginning, our state, since we are getting data from the database, at first we need to load, right? So at the beginning, our state is going to be async loading, right? After we are done loading, let's create a try catch block, right? We are going to await, and then we get items from our, and then we are going to await add items into our favorites, right? And then after that, what we are simply going to do, we are going to assign our state, right, to an async value.data, right? At first, what we have is we have the values that are in our favorite box, right? So these are the values that are present in our favorite box, right? So that means if in our favorite box we already have like menu items inside there, right? What we are simply going to do is we are going to add a new menu item that the user will add to that box, right? So that's what we do with this menu item here. We will simply add this menu item to what? To these existing values that are already there inside our favorite box, right? So after that, what we are simply going to do now is we are simply going to show a snack bar, right? Show snack bar. So what we simply need to do is if we go inside our utils folder, right? If you go inside our utils folder, right? So we don't get chills. So I'll just create I'll simply create a file called util.dat, right? So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to paste this function right here that's going to display a snack bar, right? So this function right here, which is just simply going to show a snack bar, right? So if we go here, let's import that function inside our, and then what we are simply going to display in that function is we need to pass in the context, right? And then we are simply going to say menu item added to favorites, right? Like this, right? And then now what if there is an error while least we are trying to add an item to our if there's an error while we're trying to add our item to to our Hive box, right? We'll simply a state, right? Assign a state to async value dot error, right? And then we pass in the E, and then here we'll just pass in a state trace. Like this. So we are done with the method for adding our items to our favorites. Now we need to deal with the deletion part, right? Deleting the item from our. So what we simply have to do is let's create a method of type future. It's not going to return anything. So it's going to delete a menu item. So to delete a menu item, what do we need? We need an index, right, of that particular item inside our box. And then also need a build context just to display snake bar. If we so async right here, what state is called to constant async value. So first we want to load, right, async value dot loading. First we're just loading the items, right? And then let's create a try catch block right here. So a try catch block, and then what we're simply going to do is await favorite repository dot delete menu item, right? So we're going to delete an item at a particular index, right? And then now we need updated menu items, right? Updated menu items, which is going to be type list, and then menu model, right? And then from, so that updated list, that means that we are getting the updated list of items that are in our what, in our box, right? Which are going to be a state dot value. So this particular state is this. It's a list of menu items, right? Right there. It's a list of menu items. That's our state there, right? And then what we are simply going to do is that from our updated menu items, right, we are just going to remove that particular menu item at that particular index, right? And then once we are done, we need to update our state, right? So to update our state, we simply say async value dot data. And then what's the data now? The data now is our updated menu items, right? Since here we got all the menu items inside our favorite box, we remove that item at a particular index, right? And then we'll then assign this state, update this state to that updated menu item state. So now we have just pre-updated our state, right? And then we'll simply show a snake bar, right? Context, and then the text is going to be deleted, and then index what, on favorites, right? And then if somehow we have an error, we simply have to what? We simply have to catch that error right there, right? We simply have to catch that error, right? Right. So now this is I will catch that error, right? So now let's go the top of our favorites, right? And then what we need to do is let's create a favorites controller provider. Favorite controller provider, right? Favorite controller provider, which is going to be of type async notifier provider, right? Which is going to be of async notifier provider. And then it's going to take in the favorite controller right there, and then a list menu model. And then what we simply do, favorite controller .new. Right. So we are done with our favorites. Now we need to make sure that we move to the UI section, right? We need to make sure that we move to the what? To the UI section, right? So let's go inside our favorite screen, right? So here we have the favorite screen, right? So we need to make sure that we convert this to a consumer widget, right? So you know that if we are to consume Riverpod providers, right, we need to make sure that we change from extend stateless widget to a consumer widget, and then in our build context we need to pass in the widget reference, right? So the widget reference will allow us to just be able to read providers or to watch providers, right? So what I'm just going to do is say find our favorites, right? Favorite is equal to reference.watch, right? So what are we going to watch? We are going to watch a favorite controller provider right there, right? And then let's get rid of this constant right here, right? And then what we are simply going to do is we need to set our background. So our background is going to be up color.primary color, right? Like this. And then we have the body, right? And then we have the body, and then the body is going to be favorite.when, right? Then we pass in the data here, and then error, and then stack trace, and then it's going to be error text, and then it's going to be error.toString, right? And then for the loading, we'll simply have to show a circular progress indicator, right? So it's just loader. We created this, earlier on when we started this series, right? So what we simply need to do here is we need to return a size box, right? So let's go here. Let's use arrow function, right? And then we need to return a sized box, right? And then the height is going to be media query. So let's just get rid of this. It's supposed to be media query dot of context dot size dot height. So this simply means that it's going to take in the height of the entire screen, right? And then we need to pass in the child, right? And then we need to pass in the child, right? So the child is going to be a safe area, and then it also takes another child, which is going to be a single child score view, right? Single child score view right there. And then what we are simply going to do with the single child score view is it takes another child, right? And for that child, we are just going to use the column widget here, then children, right? And then what we are simply going to do is okay, so what we are simply going to do is let's create a row, and then children, and then let's create a container. The height is going to be 43, and then the width is going also to be 43. And then what we need is we need to decorate it, right? And then the box decoration, and then the color is going to be colors.white. And then we also need the shape, which is box shape dot circle, right? And then we also need to give this container a child. So the child is going to be image.asset, right? And then we provide assets, we direct to assets, and then icons, and then back arrow dot png, right? And then the height is going to be 50 and the width is going to be 50. Okay, so let's make sure that box declaration is, then let's wrap this container with a gesture detector here. Let's wrap it with a gesture detector, and then on tape, let's create an on tape function so that when the user clicks on this, and then we are simply going to use the navigator to push, navigator to push context, and then material page route, and then builder. Going to take in a context, and then that context is going to get it to the main screen. Get right. And then also, after this container, after this gesture detector, let's create a size box widget, right? Let's give a width of 120, and then we also need to create a text. So the text is going to be favorites, and then let's create a style, text style. And then here, the font size, let's give it a font size of 20. And then the font weight is going to be font weight dot bold, right? And then let's just repeat the constant, to make sure that the constant, right? And then now after this, right, after this column, what we are simply going to do is let's create a size box. The size box, right? So the height of this size box is going to be media query dot of context, and then dot size dot height, and then times 0.9. So want this size box to occupy 0.9 space of the entire height, right? And then now the child for this particular is going to be a list view dot builder, right? List view dot builder. So it's going to take in a context and an index, right? A context and an index right there. And then we also need an item count, right? We also need an item count, and then the item count is going to be data.length. Item count is going to be data.length, right? Shrimp rep, let's change it to false, right there. And then we also need the list view physics. So the physics is going to be bouncing scrolling physics, right? bouncing, scrolling physics right there, right? Okay. So now what we simply need to do is we are simply going to return a column widget. We're simply going to return a column widget, and then we want s and then children, right? And then what we simply need to do with this column widget is we need spacing, right? So I'm just going to use size box, and then we'll give it a height of 12, right? We'll give it a height of 12, right? And then we are simply going to create a container, right? We are simply going to create a container, and then let's just add a padding to the container because we don't want it to be stuck to the walls, right? And then the width of this container is going to be double dot infinity, so we want it to maximize the wall width, right? And then the height is going to be 107, right? Let's give it a height of 107. And then we also need to give it like a decoration, right? Box decoration, right? We need also to use a box decoration, and then we'll give it a color. The color is going to be colors of white, right? We want to give it a white color right there. And then the other thing that we need to give it, we need to give it like a border radius, right? So we need to give it a border radius. So border radius dot circular, and then yeah, and then going to take in a child, and then let's give it a row, then children right there, right? And then what we need for the children is main axis alignment, and then main axis alignment dot space between, right? Because we want the space between the row widget child, right? Children, right? And then inside that space, inside our row widget, we need to create another row. We need to create another row widget. It's going to take in children, right? Then inside that children, let's use a cliplet, right? Because we want to give a nice border radius to our image, right? This cliplet is going to take in a child, right? And then image, right? Image dot network, right? And then we are simply going to data, and then we just provide an index, and then the image the toString, right? And then the width is going to be 136, and then let's give it a height. The height is going to be 87, and then let's use the feet. Let's give it a feet. Right? So the feet, so the feet is going to be box feet dot field, right? Right there. And then after this clip rect, what we are simply going to do is we also need a column, right? A column. So let's create a column widget, right? And then that column widget, let's wrap it with some padding, because we don't want it to be stuck close to our image, right? And then cross axis alignment. So let's say cross axis alignment, and then cross axis alignment dot start, and then okay, let's give it children. So then we need a height from the top, constant sized box, and then let's give it a height of 20, right? Because this is our, if you can check from our, let me pull our emulator, and then let me just show you from the simulator right here, right? You can see, right? This is the title. It's 2020 from the top, right there, right? So this is, you see, this is going to be a title and then price, and then we'll have the delete button right there. Okay, so let's go inside there. Inside our column, what we are simply going to do is we are going to display a text. Text widget, and then it's going to take in data, type index dot title, and then dot toString, and then dot toString, and then style, and then text style, and then color, going to be colors dot black right there, and then font size. Our font size is going to be 12, and then our font weight is This could be a weighting of W700. Right? That's for our title right there. And then we also need, as you can see, separation. We use a sized box, and then the height is going to be 40. So if you can see from here, there's difference between the title and the price, right? And then what we simply have to do here is let's give an expanded, and then title is going to be of type text, and then inside our text is going to be $$, and then data index dot price, right? And then for this price, we're just going to give it a color, style, text style, and then color, and then colors dot gray 700. Right, so let's remove the constant, and then the font size is going to be 12, and then the font weight is going to be font weight to W500, like this, right? So we are done. So we are done with the middle part, right? So after this raw widget right here, right, we have this raw, right here, and then we have another raw. So in this raw, what we are simply going to do is let's create an image dot asset, right? So let's create an image dot asset, and then we need this delete icon right here. So we need this delete icon right here, right? So to use this delete icon, we are simply going to get it from Figma, right? If you remember, I showed these designs on Figma that we made on our food delivery application, right? On Figma, right here. So this is our application right here. This is our application right here, right? So we need this icon right here, this icon. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm simply going to download, to export this icon, right? Export delete. And then let's get it inside our download folder right here. So I'm simply going to copy it, and then so you get it from my GitHub repository. So review and finder, and then I'm simply going to paste it. Okay, so I'm simply going to paste it. So it's under assets, icons, and then delete the png, right? So let's give this image a height of 20 and a width of 20 right here, right? And then let's wrap this with a gesture detector, right? So let's wrap it with a gesture detector, and then let's wrap this with our padding, right? So in this gesture detector we need an on tape, right? On tape, and then in this on tape function, what we are simply going to do, we are going to reference dot read, and then favorites controller provider dot notifier, and then we are simply going to delete this item, this particular index, and then we provide our context, right? So now we are done with the favorites item, right? We are done with our favorites item, but now what we simply need to do is we need to implement this when we go inside our home screen. So let's go inside our home screen, right? So we have this all menu widget right here, right? We have this all menu widget that's going to show all our menu items or our menu item widgets, right? Then in this all menu widget, we have the menu item widget, right? So if you remember, I worked on this on the menu all menu item widget, right? And then we have this favorite icon right here. So let's make sure that we wrap this favorite icon with our gesture detector, right? So let's wrap it with our gesture detector here. And then want that when the user clicks on this, we want to add our items to favorites, right? So what we simply need to do is to remember, change this to consumer widget. Change this to consumer widget. And then here, we are simply going to pass in the widget reference. Widget ref, and then reference, you get. And then let's get a final. It's supposed to reference to watch. And then we are simply going to watch the favorite controller provider. So now inside our gesture detector, where is our gesture detector? Inside our gesture detector, what we are simply going to do is favorites dot, okay, we simply say reference dot read favorites favorite controller provider dot notifier dot add. So we're simply going to add this menu model. So it's supposed to be menu model, right? Simply going to add this menu model. So now if we go if you go inside our menu detail screen, we also have a favorites icon. So we are simply going to do the same thing. We're happy with the gesture detector widget, gesture detector, and then it's going to be simply going to use an on tape function. Then yeah, then here what we simply consumer stateful widget. So yeah, you already have. So what we are simply going to do now is on that, we'll just simply say reference dot read favorites controller provider dot notifier dot add to favorites, right? Like this, right? And then now that we are done, I'm simply going to refresh our emulator, right? Right, so I'm just going to pull out our emulator here. Okay, so the reason why this is not displaying images is I'm using another project, and then that other project I did not configure my credit card for Firebase storage, right? So on your project, you can just configure a credit card and everything will be working well. Okay, so let's add items to favorites, right? So let's try to add items to favorites. So I think it's not adding. Let's go to our favorite screen or menu item widget. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, so if we go, let's go inside our all menu items favorites right here, right? So what we simply need to do is we have this menu item widget, right? This menu item widget. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm just going to copy everything from the menu item widget, right? From the padding, right? Copy. And then if we go inside our all menu item widget here, we simply have to change this to, and then let's paste it there, right? And then let's import. And then here we're simply going to pass in the data that the particular item index, right? Index, right? And then let's go, let's change this to data index to price, right? And then let's do the same thing here. Then let's do the same thing also here. Okay, so I think everything is now okay. Let's try and what review and restart our application. Right. Let's see now if we are now adding items to favorites. So it seems as if we did not configure the favorites button. Let's check. So we configured it, but somehow it's not working. So let's see. Okay, so I think because we used Hive, we configured Hive, we need to stop our emulator. And then I think we need to rerun it again from scratch. So let's wait for it to just finish. Okay, so now that our application is running, let's see if we can, if now it's working. So let's see. So it's saying that we forgot to register the adapter. So let's see. We configured the adapter, but somehow it's giving us an error. So let's go back to our main.dat file. Main.dat file, hive.register adapter. We have the adapter here. So what's causing this error? So guys, so what was causing the error was because if we go inside our, let's go inside our menu model, right? If you go inside our menu model, we can see that we have this nested ingredients model, right? But this ingredients model is not registered as an adapter in our Hive database. And also we have not defined it as a type that can be stored in Hive database. So let's go under ingredients, right? And then models, right? And then here we need to annotate with get Hive. You need to annotate with the Hive type, and then the type is going to be 1 since our menu item, is 0, this type ID is going to be 1, right? And then we need to annotate the fields as well, right? So Hive field, and then the index here is 0, and then we also need to annotate also here Hive field, and then the field is 1, right? So now that we are done annotating the ingredients, and also what we need to do is let's just run that build runner command, right? So that we can generate our ingredient adapter, right? Okay, so now that we are done, let's go inside our main.dat file, right? So inside our main.dat file, if you still remember, we had registered the menu model adapter. Let's also register the ingredient, right? Ingredient model adapter, right? Ingredient model adapter, right? Like this, right? And then what I'm simply going to do here is I'm simply going to open our emulator right here, and then I'm going to remove this application. I'm going to delete it, and then I'm simply going to run it, right? So let's run it, and then let's test our application. Okay, now that our app is running, so let's go inside, and then you can see menu item added to favorites. We can also add this one, menu item added to favorites, menu item added to favorites. Then if we go inside our favorites, you can see these are the items that we have in our favorites. We can also delete them. Yeah, so basically that was it, guys, on adding our items to favorites. So in this video you learned how to use Hive database, which stores values in key value pairs, and also it stores items in a box, right? And then we also learned that since this menu model is a nested JSON, right? It's a nested JSON with ingredients. We also need to annotate these ingredients with a Hive type. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure you share the video, and also make sure you like, so that I can continue to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.